probably takes 6 sets of an exercise to double the benefit of 1 set.
Wow.
We've got recent data to show most of your benefits occur at the first 1 or 2 sets. And then it just keeps dropping down. You just get less and less and less.
Tony, you've had an insanely successful career in the fitness industry for over 30 years now. You've educated over 50,000 coaches, is that right?
That's right.
And you have a PhD in exercise and sports science.
So the soreness that you get after training, that's all to repair and remodeling, not to hypertrophy. Damage is not really considered a pathway for hypertrophy anymore. The other was this acidosis, this burn that you get. That's where drop sets and supersets and trisets were so popular because you would get to your third exercise and the burn would be so great. Again, we would smile because clients' pain is our love language. Firstly, there is no such thing as toning.
Can you get long, lean muscles from doing bar class?
Only if you do Pilates. No, I'm just kidding.
It's psychologically so difficult, though, to let go of this idea that doing more doesn't always mean more.
I'm of the opinion that we should follow the physiology, even though the data doesn't strongly support that. And as data comes out, we can change our mind. That's the beauty of science.
Would you ever actually prescribe someone to do the exact same workout
Yes.
every Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Absolutely.
Tony, you've had an insanely successful career in the fitness industry for over 30 years now. You've educated over 50,000 coaches, is that right?
That's right.
And you have a PhD in exercise and sports science. How important is it to be a lifelong student in this industry?
It will probably suit your personality. And if you're a curious person who just likes to learn and in your spare time you read and you just want to know why things are the way that they are, you'll just keep studying, and that'll either be formally, you'll go back to school, or you'll just spend all your spare time reading and collecting books.
I saw your library. It was unbelievable.
I'm called a hoarder. It's just all hoarding.
So what type of student were you growing up? Were you like very into your education, or did that come later?
It came with pure interest. At school, I was what you would call below average. And even my first year at university, I was just there to be there. And then we finally got into subjects I was interested in, which was nutrition and anatomy, physiology. And by the time I was a week in, okay, this is my thing.
Yeah.
And then I didn't need to work at it. I just loved it. And I think a lot of people can relate to that work loses its work genre and becomes passion.
Yeah. What do you think it was about anatomy and physiology and all of that drew you in?
It's just endlessly fascinating. If you're in this field, it's going to be fascinating. Anatomy, how things fit together, the structure of it, how it all works so finely tuned to produce endurance performance or muscle contractions. And there's still so much to be discovered. If you just take muscle mass, for example, what I learned in the 90s, the nuts and bolts are still there, but almost everything has been reevaluated and there's better ways of doing things.
Yes. And I think, that's a key reason we wanted to have this conversation with you today is because it does change so quickly. And I think whether you're a coach or you're just a fitness enthusiast, someone who cares about their health and well-being, there is a responsibility to kind of stay on top of it, to make sure that you're not wasting your time and energy. So we'll get into a lot of that today and really, dive into what we know now and maybe some of the things that from the past, it's time to let go of and just remove the confusion.
It's so interesting how many people we've spoken to who considered themselves to be like below average up until the point where they found their thing.
Me.
And then all of a sudden they realized that they're not a bad student. It was just the wrong topic. They just hadn't found their passion. I think it's an important message for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you fall in alignment with the thing that actually sparks you up, it's usually pretty easy and exciting to keep learning more about it. It's just unfortunate when you're not someone who naturally gets excited about math and science that you're learning in school. You were a triathlete at some point, correct? What sports did you play growing up, though? What excited you then?
Living on the coast of Australia, I think everyone has the same story. You're pushed in the water as soon as you can walk, probably before you can walk. And if it involved water, surfing, swimming, underwater rock running, you name it. If there was water,
Underwater rock running.
Yeah, it was something that surfers came up with to build their lungs, and you would pick up a huge rock underwater and just run with it until your lungs wanted to burst.
Lung capacity.
Lung capacity.
The first time I was surfing and I got like fully wiped out, I was like, that's it for me. I'm going to die. I'm never going to find the surface. And so I understand why you really need to train those skills.
Yeah. Once you get what's called the laundromat and you're spinning and you don't know which way is up.
It's awful.
It's a special feeling. And being able to not panic.
Yeah. Hold
your breath for long periods.
Yeah.
So it was surfing, but we had a family friend who became a world champion in triathlon. And I was like, oh, he can do it. I can do it. But I couldn't do it. And I think a lot of sports scientists and coaches are failed athletes. That we like it. We apply all of our studies to our own training, and that's how we get through uni. I applied it to endurance sport until I met a strength coach who I was working with. And we learnt strength and conditioning at university, but we really didn't know anything about programming. And he was a biomechanist. He understood muscle contraction and sets and reps. And that moved me directly in the opposite field from endurance, and then did strength hypertrophy. And I always blended both together. So I think I'm probably one of the, I'm in the minority of coaches who love both disciplines, because most people either love endurance sports or they love muscle, and those two never speak. And I love speaking both those conversations. Do you still do both now? Like, do you do endurance sports on a regular basis? I do. I try and actually do a lot of work on a stationary bike. So I do all my reading and my writing with a desk, and I sound like a real idiot, but I just type away and can do searches and do that. So I do a lot of zone 1, zone 2. Yep. Hours and hours of it. I still lift 3 days a week. Yep. Still. Sounding like I'm very old, but I lift 3 days a week, and I do then probably 10 to 14 hours a week of cardio. Wow. That's incredible. And triathlete? That's long gone. Okay. But I still swim, cycle, run. But I am a big believer in multi-moding. And in my home garage, I've got a ski erg, a rower, a stationary bike, skipping rope. And I will try and mix all of these up as regularly as possible, because that motor learning, cyclists can be very unidirectional, and they just cycle and maybe a bit of running because they know their bone density is at risk. But you really, if you work backwards, and we tell what do the elderly need? And they need strength, and they need power, and they need agility, and they need flexibility. You've got to be training this not in your 70s. You've got to be training it in your 30s, 40s, 50s.
I think there's been a lot of attention recently on this idea of health span, not just lifespan. But then I think the phrasing's kind of shrunk again now into like, what are you able to do and perform at within that health span? That 14-hour number, is that something that you landed at deliberately for your aerobic training, or is that just what conveniently gets your research done?
A little bit of both. And it was just a decision to help me stay motivated. And it was a number of years ago where I thought, what would I like to do in a year? And that's going to be my number. That ended up being, I need to do 2 hours minimum a day, so over 14 a week. And how can I do that and still maintain work and family and friendships? And it just means that most of my catch-up time with friends will be on the bike or walking. And when I'm doing my reading, which I do probably a minimum an hour a day, that will be spent on the bike or walking on an incline. And the weight training is always phones down, and I'm either doing it with my son or doing it by myself. And that just ends up being the weekly structure.
You've got to find something that works for you, right?
Right, yeah. And if I only had 7 hours a week, I wouldn't do as much low intensity work. I'd probably rev the engine, but there's this mismatch. The harder you go, you just can't do as much. And because I want to do a lot, I have to do it at lower intensities. Are you able to like focus in on your study while going at a moderate intensity, like a little bit higher? So my zone 2, for those people who know watts, is about 260 watts. Okay. And I weigh 80 kilos. And that means I can sit comfortably at 200 watts. Yep. And because that's now zone 1, and just talk. It's so the fitter you become, then you can do lots at low intensities. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's definitely the time for it then. You know, you can make it fit if you find a way. Maybe you just need to restructure my desk, get a spin bike in there. I've been doing so much work on the Stairmaster, like on my phone or my iPad, and it's wonderful because I just sit for too many hours a day now. Right, yeah. I already did an hour before today just reading the last science that came out the last 24 hours, and then going down rabbit holes of
different things. And I just do that all sitting at 180 watts, something like that.
Brilliant.
I always say to my clients, look for opportunities to move more. Like just where can it fit super seamlessly into your life?
Right.
And that is a perfect example. So where did your personal training career actually begin?
I thought I'd be a musician, and I was playing gigs and teaching guitar, and I was doing a side hustle, which was university in exercise sports science. And I thought, well, I need a little bit more money, so I'll just do some coaching, personal training. And it wasn't until the end of the first year of university that I thought I actually do like this. And then stopped the music and then threw myself into exercise sports science. And so that's how it started.
And where did the music come from?
I have OCD tendencies. And when I thought I'd like to play guitar, then that's all I did. I was one of those kids who played 6 hours every day, went to bed with my guitar in my bed. At the dinner table, I'd be left hand playing as I'd be having family dinner, watching TV. It was a real problem.
You're definitely a multitasker, Tony.
Yeah, I'm a multitasker, no question. But I realized that I enjoy it, but it wasn't my passion. I still play guitar, but I still collect guitars, but the passion now shifted into sports science.
What was it about coaching other people that grabbed you?
It was that I could apply what I was learning. So you'd be learning these anatomical concepts or physiological concepts, and you think, oh, that's why we're doing that rep range or that set number or that rest between sets, because I could apply it and was understanding what I was studying so much better. But also then the feedback where clients would say, yeah, I'm feeling better and I'm sleeping better and I'm losing weight or gaining muscle. And then when DEXA became available, you could have a 6-monthly DEXA where a client could say, I lost 3 kilos of fat and gained 4 kilos of muscle. My scale weight went up, but I actually improved my body composition.
It's so important to think about how directly applying what you're learning at the time that you're learning it.
Yeah.
And, you've been an educator for a very long time, but you've also coached people in person the entire time. Is that deliberate? Or?
Absolutely. And every field needs people doing just that. And if you are a researcher, you just need to do research because it is very, very difficult. And then there's people who do a little bit of coaching and research, and they can ask really good questions, but they'll never be as good as somebody who just researches. And then there's people who are also athletes as well, so they really push themselves and they know what it is at the pointy end. In other words, they've been training for 10 years and they know what they go through, the ups and downs, the injuries, the overreaching, peaking with their studies, with their coaching. They make great generalists. And I am not an athlete, but I do train a lot. So I understand trying to balance all of those kinds of things. But I'm a dreadful researcher, scientist. I'm just trained that way. So you've got to know what your limitations and strengths are. Clearly for me, just by pure experience, it's coaching.
When you say a dreadful researcher, what would make you a dreadful researcher?
Just not enough time doing it. You just have to do something over and over and over. And for me and colleagues of my generation, we've done well over 80,000 sessions with clients. And no two people are the same, but there's a lot of common threads. And that helps you make decisions really quickly when you see movement slow down or just somebody's language when they walk in. You know that they're tired and we might need to modify things. You can't read that in an 8-week study. And I think that's sometimes where the challenge comes, with the good intention of, well, I'm going to be evidence-based or science-based and I'm going to read these studies and that's going to inform what I do. And it should. But it takes us back to the point we made earlier of people who are athletes, who know their athletes' bodies for many years, if not many decades. I've trained some people close to 3 decades.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
And you really know them back to front. You can infer ideas from science, but ultimately, it's the coach's heart that will say, you could do more, you should do less, that won't last more than 6 weeks. And then you can tailor make. And I think when coaches like myself hear these generalist advice, if you're a female, you should do this.
Right.
If you're stressed, you should do that. So, well, maybe, but maybe not. And that's probably not even sex specific. It probably applies to men too.
Yeah. I don't think people realize just how difficult a task it is to convey information from research into the real life application of coaching someone. I mean, I don't understand this area as much as you could probably correct me on it, but when it comes to performing an experiment well, it feels like the idea is to remove variables as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So you test things in isolation, but then when you put it into the real world and with a person,
right,
all those variables are back again.
Exactly. And we're not really interested in a one variable outcome, but a scientist is. And that's where you try and understand the broader scientific method. And I have a lot of really dear friends, great coaches, but not science trained. And they'll very much dismiss science because of that limitation. But it's just understanding where that fits in. And that 8 or 12-week study that's looking at one thing now needs to be confirmed in different populations, different age groups, different training durations. And then we try and blend that into everything else we know about rep range, failure, rest between sets, and you try and put that all together. And then you got to test it in the real world.
Do you ever work in tandem with researchers? Like, I feel like there would be so much value to a coach like you who understands the research and is doing that further experimentation, almost relaying that back, and then that helps determine where we're going from there in the research.
Yes, but in a very small way. There's people who do this.
Yeah.
People like Eric Helms, for example, is a coach, is an athlete, world-class bodybuilder, and is the head of the Performance Institute in New Zealand. People like him, they just ask the best questions of research because they're doing it with athletes and they're doing it themselves. And then they say, well, that study, that's not designed well.
Yeah.
Because no one would ever do that in the real world.
Right.
And when you do look back at the historical literature, sometimes you do look at that study design and think, why did they do it that way? Because no one would probably ever do that in the real world. And then you put yourself back, well, you've got a head of department and you've got ethics, and it's not easy to get funding or approval. Yeah. And so they'll often do things in a very basic manner that somebody else will then come and build upon.
And you've positioned yourself in that gap between coaches and researchers by becoming an educator.
Right.
Now, you ended up working with a ton of athletes across the span of your career. Was that always part of the goal when you were early on in your career?
I thought I would just work with athletes. I was one of those trainers. And because I was a triathlete, I had access and knew a lot of people in those worlds. But I also realized that athletes didn't make any money in those sports. So I wasn't working at that time with tennis or golf or the really high-paying sports.
Yeah.
And I realized I needed to PT so that I could provide those services, if not for free, for heavily subsidized.
Yep.
And I always borrowed both. And then I just realized, well, there's this whole glory of being a strength coach and working with athletes. It's not that it's all cracked up to be. It is great, but they're often away and can't afford it. And I work with people who were happy to pay for 2 or 3 times a week training and love their training. Yep. And then I just realized, well, I want to work with people who want to train.
Yeah.
And there's some trainers who their job is to motivate those people who don't want to train. That's not my kind of personality. Yeah, right. But we need those trainers.
Yeah.
I'm just not one of them.
So you are, I'm going to call you an expert in exercise programming from all of your research. And I just think this is an area, especially right now with the internet, social media, there is so much more information available to people than ever before. But that creates a lot of confusion. So today we're going to kind of go through all of the basics of exercise programming. But I just want to start by asking, if I do Pilates on a Monday and a HIIT workout on a Tuesday, and maybe I come into the gym and lift some weights and jump on some machines on a Thursday, and then I run on a Friday, does that work? Like, what kind of results can I expect from that?
The answer is it works for what? What do you want to achieve? And there's 2 frameworks by which any program should operate under. And the first is, what do you want to achieve? And then secondly, how do you recuperate? What is your recovery timeline like? And then we need to understand minimum effective doses, because you can actually achieve a great amount across a number of different characteristics of fitness by just dabbling in a little bit of each. Will you maximize muscle mass and strength? No. But if you just want a little bit of everything, then you can do that. The more interesting question is, well, how can I optimize all of those things? And that's where you create your list of, well, what's important to me? Do we want flexibility, endurance, strength, bone density. And when you think about all those different characteristics, there's a lot. Luckily, you can do some of them at the same time.
Yeah.
But I'm a firm advocate in having a multidisciplinary approach to fitness, because we get the muscle guys and girls, they tend to just do that and then just do their cardio to get lean without any viewpoint to cardiovascular fitness or any underlying physiology.
Yep.
And then the endurance folks, they'll do a bit of strength because they have read that good endurance athletes sometimes do strength training. But they often, when you look at even great cyclists and runners, you watch what they're doing, it's like, yeah, your coaches still don't grasp what strength training is.
Right.
Swinging around a ball because it's functional. It's not what we do as strength coaches.
Yeah.
And I think both sides could probably benefit from speaking to each other.
Could we dive into the stimuluses or how those changes in endurance, speed, strength, power actually occur?
Any outcome that we want from exercising will have a trigger for an adaptation. And understanding those triggers can help us fine-tune the dose of them. Because for somebody just wanting to build muscle, they want to maximize those triggers and get rid of any interference. And that interference can be fatigue, that can be from soreness from running, that could be interference molecularly from what's triggering an endurance adaptation versus a strength adaptation. And that's where you need to ask yourself, well, what do I really want from a training program? Virtually everyone wants a little bit of everything. And then we understand, well, what is the program trying to do? And then we go after that. And most of the benefits occur at very low doses of exercise. And then it's a diminishing return thereafter. The diminishing return is really important if you are an athlete, but it's almost completely irrelevant to the general public. Just take set number, for example. No one exercise can target all of the muscle fibers in your glute, your quad, your chest. Therefore, you need a variety of different exercises. Traditionally, we didn't view it that way. It would be, this month, you're going to do squats and maybe leg extensions. Next program, next month, you're now going to do lunges and leg press. Next program. And now we understand that adaptation is occurring at a fiber level, not at a muscle level. And that just simply means that the more exercise variety you have, you're going to hit those muscle fibers. But if you stop that exercise, you will rapidly detrain those unique fibers you've just developed. And we've got recent data to show how quickly the diminishing returns kick in for set volume, i.e. most of your benefits occur at the first 1 or 2 sets. And then it just keeps dropping down. You just get less and less and less the more sets you do. And depending on the review, it probably takes 6 sets of an exercise to double the benefit of 1 set.
Wow.
Which would mean that for virtually everyone out there, after your warm-up sets and you know what you're about to do, you do 1 or 2 sets of a number of different exercises that are biomechanically different. Hip thrust, Romanian deadlift, deep squat, lateral abduction, and hit all aspects of glute. In the past, we would do them successively across the programs. But you're probably better off if we now understand these triggers of volume and what's actually creating muscle hypertrophy. You might do 1 or 2 sets across 4 different exercises in one go.
So for building muscle, for hypertrophy, it's important to make sure that there's multiple exercises that are achieving different things for the target muscle, and to complete 2 to 3 good, like, functional sets in order to see a response.
Exactly. And that's where it comes interesting, because you can't specialize every muscle in the body. But you might say glutes are important to me, or shoulders are important to me. And some muscles that do multiple functions really do benefit from multiple exercises to capitalize on that. Glutes
Can you
and
give
pecs are a great
some
example.
examples of that? Yeah.
So glutes are hip extensors.
Yep.
And they are more active when the knee is bent, like a hip thrust, for example. But they are active in a straight leg extension, like a Romanian, like a back extension. That's one class of exercise. We've got hip thrust, and then we've got straight leg extension. That's 2 now. But the glutes are also abductors, and the glute max is more active when the hip is flexed. and the glute med when the leg is straight. Now that's two.
Abduction being when?
Taking the leg to the side. Yeah. Like a classic low cable exercise or a seated abduction. Those are not the same exercise. So you need both of them. And now we've got abduction, flexed hip, straight leg, bent knee hip extension, straight leg hip extension, and then probably some vertical extension movements like a squat pattern, step up pattern.
Anatomically, what changes when the knee or the hip is flexed when it comes to the leverage that the glute?
You've also got other hip extensors. Your adductors are very good hip extensors, and so are your hamstrings. I think most people underestimate how important the adductors are as hip extensors until you watch female physique competitors in the back pose. And for the first time, you'll look at that and say, do they have 5 hamstrings? Or what's that muscle on the inside? And that's your adductors.
Okay, so let's just make this real simple for our listener. So adductor would be that inner thigh muscle,
Correct.
right? Abductor would be, I mean, we're very simplifying this, but the outer thigh. If you think
Outer
of the
thigh.
inner and outer thigh machine, right?
You got it.
Yep. We're going to go out to get the abductor, in to get the adductor. What else did we say? I want to make sure these are all clear.
Yeah, so pulling your leg back with a bent knee.
Yep.
Or
Hamstring
a straight
curl.
leg.
Yep.
And then probably a vertical extension pattern like a step up, a squat, a split squat, a Bulgarian.
Yep. So what you're basically saying is the benefit, or we're going to maximize benefit by hitting all of these different aspects of what the glute can do.
Right.
As opposed to just doing a lot
Hip
of
thrust.
reps of one exercise.
You got it. And then the more interesting question is, because I think that's pretty straightforward and not controversial. 10 years ago, it was very thought that if you train the glutes, you're training the glutes. So you're training the lats, so you get a good lat pull down or a good bench press, and that's hitting the muscle. And now we realize, well, it's hitting those fibers that need to do that function, but not other ones. And therefore, if they're not being hit, they don't get a training effect. And now we understand, because technology moves and you can track these things so much better, that you do need, for muscles that do a number of different things, pec, glute, lats, you need a number of different biomechanically different exercises. So the interesting question is not so much that. I think that's pretty straightforward. It's, well, how do you fit that all in?
Are there different benefits to doing it in either of those ways?
It's the data on this doesn't seem to think that there's a big difference. In other words, if you did it all on one day, or split it and do 2, or split it and did 3, but you at the end of the week you did the same, there seems to be, in the findings, it's pretty similar. And that is really surprising. So is that a research question that they haven't been able to tease it out in 8 weeks? In other words, if you ran it for 16 weeks, could we start to see some differences? Because when we understand what triggers hypertrophy, there should be a difference, which means currently I'm of the opinion that we should follow the physiology, even though the data doesn't strongly support that. And as data comes out, we can change our mind. That's the beauty of science. But the reasons for this is, if I walk you through it, is really simple. The trigger of hypertrophy by far and away is how much active tension you put on the muscle at a single fiber level.
Yep.
And if I were to take option number 1, and that is put all 6 exercises on one day and do a leg day, and we record how much load you lift for your latter 3 exercises versus taking those 3 and putting them when you're fresh, that difference is stunning on how much more you can lift. Then there's the psychology. If I said we're going to do 4 sets on a hip thrust versus you got 1 set, that's called effort distribution. You will hold yourself back knowing you've got a whole session of legs to do and you've got 4 sets of this. And because tension drives hypertrophy, then you want the maximum tension.
Now, if someone's a beginner lifter, do we think they can get enough out of one single set? Like, they may not know how to apply that much effort yet.
I couldn't agree more. And that's where coaching comes in. You've got the science that will say tension drives this. Excellent. That's where I really do think overload techniques are really helpful, because an overload technique, like a drop set or a superset, will force that effort that they probably don't know how to get. I also think machines should be the predominant training mode because they are safe. You can work a client on a machine chest press or a machine leg curl, and until they cannot lift it up, you know that they're now achieving peak motor unit or muscle fiber recruitment. And if I then superset that or drop set it, I'm sure that they are. But when you look at the literature on overload techniques, they often show that they're comparable to doing traditional straight sets. But it's probably because that first set was taken close to failure and the first set kind of gave you everything. And that's important to understand. So who's suitable to an overload technique? I think beginners are, because it teaches them everything that we want. And people who are well-trained
probably don't need it as much.
Probably don't need it.
Yeah.
You're trying to look at tension methods for those. That's where we would use a cluster set or a rest pause. That is increasing the
Can you break
load
those
lifted.
down?
Sure. A traditional set is just one set with rest.
Yep.
And you might do 2 or 3 of those sets. A cluster set is where you would take your rep number, let's call it 8,
Yep.
and let's break it in half. You're going to do 4 reps, rest 10 or 15 seconds, and then you're going to finish the 4, and then you rest. That intraset pause is going to allow you to lift more load for the 8 reps. And
Right.
because hypertrophy is triggered by tension, you can now do your 8 reps at 100 kilos rather than 8 reps at 90 kilos.
It may be worth us diving into those mechanisms of hypertrophy and just breaking them down, making sure people are really clear on the relationship with tension.
This is really worth understanding because it's not just scientific nerd language. 10 or so years ago, 15 years ago, it was believed that there were many ways to trigger muscle growth, muscle protein synthesis. And they were muscle damage. You get sore. Were you the trainer? Brilliant. It's working. You do a new program. You get sore. Brilliant. How long were you sore for? 3 days. Fantastic. That brought out the psycho in us because we loved, and when a client said, oh, I wasn't sore, we're like, oh. Or I would even
It's not
think,
working.
I would even think, if you're not sore, I'm going into retirement. I've thrown everything at you. And so muscle damage and soreness, that was considered a part. So you get the remodeling, you saw, the muscle remodels and you become bigger. And then—
Can the muscle remodel without getting bigger?
Yes, and we'll cover that momentarily because this is all part of our change in thinking. When you read physiology and think, oh, that's actually not doing what we thought that it did. And the other was this acidosis, this burn that you get. That's where drop sets and supersets and trisets were so popular because you would get to your third exercise and the burn would be so great. Again, we would smile because clients' pain is our love language. And we would be thinking, we're triggering muscle growth because of the acidosis. The metabolic stress is what it was called. Now, the real difficulty in any hypertrophy researcher is that all these things are always happening together. How do you work out, is it tension with a little bit of damage and a little bit of acidosis, or are these latter two things not really doing anything? How do you actually stop one and just focus on something else?
Right.
And this is where animal models come in because they're able to do these kinds of things. And work at Troy Hornberger's lab and Mike Roberts' lab in the States have got very elegant ways of testing these. And they've arrived where we are now at tension essentially driving everything. But what about muscle damage? Well, Stu Phillips' lab in 2016 were able to tease out the difference in muscle protein synthesis between muscle damage and the signal of muscle protein synthesis going to growth. Until that time, everyone thought they were the same thing. Your body prioritizes getting rid of the damage pathways. So the soreness that you get and the muscle protein synthesis that goes clearly straight up after training, that's all to repair and remodeling, not to hypertrophy.
Right.
But due to the repeated bout effect is you do something you've never done it before, you're sore. You do it again 5 days later, less sore. Do it after that, not sore at all. That's how quickly muscle protein synthesis for damage repair occurs due to the repeated bout effect. But the body prioritizes that. So the first few weeks on a new program is damage repair pathways. And then after that, your muscle protein synthesis goes to actually growing muscle. So that tells us that the soreness and the damage is not driving hypertrophy. It's a separate pathway.
Right. And that was hard for us to understand for a long period of time because how do you, in humans anyway, test to see if muscle damage is occurring without also applying mechanical tension?
Yeah. And they have been able to carefully tease out looking at Z-line breakdowns and different markers that are released as inflammatory and cell swelling. They could watch those all diminish and then the muscle protein synthesis go to actually laying down new myofibrils.
Is the same true for metabolic stress?
This is harder one to tease out, and it is the last one that is being questioned, whereas damage is not really considered a pathway for hypertrophy anymore. In fact, no one considers it a pathway anymore. Whereas metabolic stress, or these pathways, they're so intimately linked to what's happening with tension that it's not really a pathway.
Can we explain metabolic stress?
Yeah, when you contract a muscle, you get metabolic byproducts. In the old days, they were called waste products, but nothing in human physiology is ever wasted. They're there for a reason. And when you perform a set of 10 squats or leg press or lunges, you are burning through metabolic pathways to produce energy for the muscle action. And those byproducts then trigger a change in acid-base balance in the muscle, and you feel it. It's a burn.
Yeah, that lactic acid. That's what people think of.
Yeah, lactic acid. And an Australian, Rob Robergs, discovered that, the acid is there, but that's not the cause of the burn. It's hydrogen ion accumulation, if you want to get into that. And forever, it was thought that burn that you're feeling is also triggering muscle protein synthesis. And in studies that have been able to inject lactate specifically, they show no rise in MPS. So that's why most people don't think that that's really a pathway. Is it doing something? Yeah, maybe small. Yeah. Here's the point. Do we invest our training programs to increase muscle damage? No. And we used to. We honestly did. A lot of eccentric protocols. And the metabolic stress, the drop sets that kept going, and the supersets and the trisets, they were all done to elicit metabolic stress. And we now realize, who would we use them for? Maybe a beginner who doesn't know effort yet, because that will teach them very quickly. For somebody who's well-trained, you need to balance there's going to be a fatigue effect.
Okay, so going back to the main thing that matters is tension. How do I apply that in my program? What does that really mean?
Tension just simply means that as you approach fatigue or failure, depending what language you want to use, you will achieve the most tension. It just happens by a different way. If we all did 8 sets of a squat, 6 reps of a squat, and we approached failure, you might be able to do one more. You basically achieve maximum tension probably from the second rep in. Yeah. Because the load is so heavy relative to maximum. Uses everything that you need to do it. That's maximum tension. But if we lighten the load and said, did 25 now, you will cycle through muscle fibers. They'll turn on and off, and then acidosis will rise. And then eventually, those last few reps, you'll achieve the most tension, but it's due to a different pathway. But it's still the same thing. You still place maximum tension on those last few repetitions.
So does the proximity to failure matter more at different rep ranges?
Yes.
Could we break that down?
If you're lifting very heavy loads, let's call it under 6 repetitions, because the load is so close to your 1 rep max, you have to use all of your available muscle fibers immediately. By definition, you're placing maximum tension on the individual fibers. If we did 15, 20, 25 reps of the same exercise, those first 10 reps, their load is insufficient to bring out the heavy hitters of your muscle fibers. They'll only be called in as you've cycled through all the other lower threshold muscle fibers, and they say, we need more support now. So then it pulls out your fast twitch fibers. You arrive at the exact same place, but you do so with much lighter load.
Yes, it's important for people to understand that your body wants to be efficient. It's not going to give you everything that it's capable of immediately, unless you give it a sufficient challenge to do so.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, that's great news for those people who don't want to lift heavy for whatever reason. They're more comfortable with 15 reps because of joints, for example. Some people love the time efficiency. I'm a time efficient guy. I'm probably everything under 10 repetitions. But for some of my older clients, we might start with 12 to 15 as they're not comfortable lifting those heavy loads yet. They haven't developed the stabilizing systems in the body to know what to do and what to stabilize and what to keep joints moving versus stabilizing them. So we use lighter loads. You just use coaching wisdom then, and not what the textbook says you're going to. But eventually, you'll arrive at the same place, which is fast twitch fiber recruitment.
So for building muscle, does the rep range really matter if you're able to achieve similar results at such varying ranges?
The textbook answer is no. The rep range doesn't make a difference. The coach's answer is yes, it does, but there's no need to argue about it. The coach's perspective is the more reps you do, the greater the unpleasant sensations are. It's much harder to really fail at 25 reps as it is at 8 reps. There's more chance of form breakdown. The fatigue that's generated in that set, both metabolically and neurologically, will have a knock-on effect to everything else. Very simple. If I said, we're all going to do 3 sets of 25 to failure of the leg press, and then we'll do the rest of your workout.
Yep.
You know everything else you're going to do will be impaired due to the knock-on fatigue, both local and brain, for everything else you do. And hypertrophy is tension-related. We're trying to maximize that tension. Could you do that as your last exercise because you're a psychopath? Sure. But you wouldn't do it first.
It's also like the heart comes into play at that point too. Like and that might be a stimulus that you want. So if you want to challenge the heart rate, maybe there's a case for higher reps, but that will tap out for a lot of people.
And those sensations of elevated heart rate, elevated ventilation, elevated acidosis, they tell your brain, they feed directly to your brain within milliseconds that you are approaching your maximum tolerable perception of effort, and we're going to shut down your motor drive to the muscle and you're going to recruit less fibers.
It's funny because the things that we associate with working hard the most, those like slow, agonizing eccentrics, that muscle burn, that being out of breath, they're not the drivers. They're sort of the nuanced, percentages that live alongside it.
This is, again, another area we've changed our mind. We thought that the eccentric was doing something remarkable to muscle hypertrophy, so slow it down to 4 to 5 seconds. But this all came from studies that didn't equate the effort of the eccentric action versus the concentric action. Yes, eccentric actions are doing something a little bit different to muscle architecture. So if you really want to dive into the difference between radial myofibrillar growth versus longitudinal, which occurs when you are...
Yes, we do.
I would, but maybe not right now.
It's easy to explain in a few sentences, but in the recent studies from Brad Schoenfeld's lab that looked at tempo, up until these studies, it really was, up until a few years ago, we would want every eccentric speed to stop gravity and to be 3 to 4 seconds to capitalize on the concept that when you lift, let's say you use 100% of your fibers, on the way down, you might use 60%. It's the reverse size principle. And those fibers that stay on are your fast twitch. So you're putting more tension on the muscle eccentrically. That should, in theory, create more hypertrophy. And Brad Schoenfeld's work showed that's actually not the case. And that's because tension, at least concentrically, is really driving these things. And that was another aspect where we had to rethink our tempo prescription. How important is it? Not very.
Yeah, I mean, I was taught that, for hypertrophy, a set had to last a certain amount of seconds for it to provide enough stimulus.
Right.
And that would have all related back to this principle of time under tension.
Right.
Is there ever a case for eccentrics to make a movement possible, like a chin-up, right? If someone doesn't have the ability to pull themselves concentrically, obviously we can use a band and all of these other modalities, but is there any benefit to training it eccentrically?
Absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the key places. You're stronger eccentrically, at least 40% stronger. So if you're 40% off doing a concentric chin-up, then you can do one eccentrically. And that gives many people who want to do chin-ups empowerment that, okay, I'm almost there.
Yeah.
And that, of course, that last from doing an eccentric to a concentric is still many weeks because it is challenging. But I think that's great empowerment.
Yeah.
But eccentric actions come with soreness. Soreness then will generate sensations to the brain, so you can use less muscle fibers in the rest of the session. It might have long-lasting effects across the week. But thankfully, due to the repeater bout effect, when you do that next week, you're going to have less soreness. So I don't tend to worry too much about those initial DOMs.
Yeah.
They will pass very quickly.
People still kind of hate them.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, we can work within those guardrails.
Yeah.
I had a gymnastics coach who used to say, if you can't do a movement, do the opposite slowly.
Yeah.
But I think it's also worth making the distinction, because we just jumped between a point about developing a strength exercise, like which basically is a chin up.
Chin-up,
Is
yeah.
like it's a 1 RM bodyweight pull
Yeah.
up type of thing. Your first one, and a correlation to hypertrophy eccentrics. So I think often a lot of what is applied and studied in strength kind of gets passed over to hypertrophy
Agreed.
in mainstream media.
Agreed. And there's many overlaps, but there's also differences because they are different characteristics.
Let's just define each of those first.
Yeah. And this is where we get into a lot of trouble when we assume that they mean the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And studies that are looking at strength are then directly applied to hypertrophy. Strength is your ability of a muscle or a group of muscles to produce force. Full stop. We tend to use that as maximal strength. They're used synonymously. In other words, when we say you're getting stronger, we typically mean maximally stronger, as in your 1 repetition maximum.
Mm-hmm.
But strength just simply means your muscle's ability to produce force. That could be your 10 rep weight or your 20 rep weight. If you're getting stronger over 15 reps, you're getting stronger. But yes, for the sake of this discussion, we mean maximal strength. That is primarily a nervous system event. Your brain's ability to recruit fibers and to release the action potentials fast so you can recruit the most amount of muscle fibers for that set.
Can we break that down in the sense of like, okay, in a deadlift, what's actually occurring there?
When you perform a deadlift or any resistance exercise and you're doing it for 1, 2, 3 reps,
Yep.
your brain will organize the muscle fibers to recruit at the highest level with the fastest discharge to recruit the largest muscle fibers, which are your fast twitch. And they will all fire together in synchronization so that when you pull the bar off the ground, you've used every available muscle fiber to do that task. If we were to lighten the load, let's call that 100 kilos. Let's put 50 kilos on there. Then you can lift it up quite effortlessly. And it won't be until rep 25 that you think, this is hard. And then you keep going. Now, let's say you fail at 26 reps. Your muscle fibers recruit the same way that they did at rep 1. It just took 26 reps to get you there.
Sounds awful.
Horrible. And there is some emerging data that high rep training might preferentially hypertrophy your slow twitch muscle fibers. We need more data on this, but it's emerging. And my approach to that is, well, until proven otherwise, somebody wishing to maximize hypertrophy should include at least 1 set of higher rep training to do that, because it's unpleasant, because it will have knock-on fatigue. We do it at the end, and we typically do it for 1 set.
So the majority of your workout would be lower reps.
Yeah.
And then right at the end,
Yeah.
go for it with 25 reps to failure.
Correct.
And essentially what you're saying is that's going to potentially access a lot of our slower twitch muscle fibers, which don't typically contribute to hypertrophy as much.
Correct, but there is emerging data that they can.
Yeah.
And this, as techniques become better, this is a watch this space.
Okay.
Because it does make sense that you are obviously recruiting your fast twitch fibers at that point of failure. And your slow are recruited from rep 1. The question is, are they preferentially being hypertrophied when you're doing 6 reps or 8 reps?
Right.
This is where new data is saying, well, we do know that the high rep training is showing a greater percentage of the hypertrophy coming from slow twitch fibers. So for coaches like me who are interested in maximizing hypertrophy for specific individuals, I'll use that advice.
Yep.
For those people who want minimum effective dose, probably will never use it.
Okay. So strength, we're really accessing or fatiguing the nervous system.
It's a neuromuscular event
Yep.
that also involves coordination.
Yeah.
What you need to do 1, 2, 3 reps is your brain understanding what to turn on, what to turn off, what to stabilize, what to work all at the same time. Beautiful coordination. Then you practice it with multiple sets. But it's all about coordination, motor control, learning. Hypertrophy involves a little bit of that, but its cascade of triggering or signaling is really different. This is where tension applied to the muscle appears to be paramount importance. And we know this from a statistical style called a meta-regression, where they can look at training to failure versus stopping a rep short, 2 short, 3 short, 10 short.
Yep.
and look at outcomes of strength and hypertrophy. And these meta-regressions by Remet, for example, have shown that when you have strength as an outcome, training to failure is probably not the be-all and end-all. Now, you could argue that's just a motor learning issue when you do work to failure, significant fatigue, and probably form breakdown.
Yeah, riskier.
Right? And for hypertrophy, though, we want maximum tension. And that's where the closer you get to failure, the better the benefit is for hypertrophy.
So you can get stronger without getting bigger.
I don't think that's even controversial in the strength world, is that if you want to get stronger, you will always keep reps in the tank. Because the risk versus reward, you achieve maximum motor unit recruitment a few reps before you hit failure.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, I think this is an important conversation to have for women in general. Like, some women don't want to put on lots of size. And we've sort of oversimplified this as like, oh, lifting weights isn't going to make you bulky. And it's like, well, maybe. And I understand how difficult it is to get bulky.
Yeah.
But also, I'm a woman that builds muscle quite easily. Like, I can get bulky if I want.
Right.
And so can we break down, like, what does it mean to train strength in a way that maybe won't put on as much size, muscle mass, volume?
And to answer this question, we have to hold two concepts together, and that is males and females, all things being equal, can hypertrophy to the same relative amount. But because males start with a higher amount, the absolute amount is going to be greater. But when you look at the data, and there are fantastic reviews across all age groups, 20s, 30s, up into the 70s, that directly compare males and females following the same weight training program, the relative change is the same. Of course, there's individual outliers. There's slow gainers and hard gainers, right? Or fast gainers and slow gainers. So some people they think about weight training and they can gain muscle mass. And something that we then need to hold in mind as well at the same time is when we're talking about studies and why some studies fail to show differences, we are looking at really small changes in hypertrophy. Sometimes the ultrasound and the MRI can't really pick that up. So if you're trying to compare a superset versus a straight set, or males versus females, and the study program is 10 weeks, the amount of hypertrophy you are getting is so small. And we could try to hold both of these concepts that males and females can hypertrophy to the same amount, but females starting at a lower amount. But secondly, it happens really slowly. But what can you notice really quickly? Well, that's simple. This is called cell swelling. When you are exercise naive and you're not used to it, and you take up a program, and it could be a high volume program. You're following somebody on Instagram and you're doing glutes for an hour. I see this every day in my gym.
Nonstop.
Actually, with phone use, it takes them 3 hours, but let's call it 50 minutes of work. And the amount of cell swelling because of muscle damage makes them feel like they've gained a lot of muscle. It ain't.
Overnight.
And it's not until you watch physique competitors and you watch their progress and you look at their glutes after a workout and you think, oh my God, look at that. And then you watch them on stage and you say, is that the same person? Because they've stopped the cell swelling, they've stopped that training volume. And then all that water and inflammation is gone.
Themselves.
So now we're seeing the real muscle.
Interesting.
And I think we often forget that. I'm an advocate of total body training and frequency for most people most of the time. And because of this, we see real changes in muscle because we don't get the cell swelling. And often when people swap from a split to a total body, they'll say, oh, I'm not as jacked. It's like, yeah, because that was just water. It's not real.
Could we just break that down a little bit further as to why the cell or how the body retains more water under those sort of more localized sessions?
There's two phenomena. One is the muscle damage pathway. If you're doing a new exercise you've never done, or there's a lot of eccentric actions, or just a lot of training volume, there are two phenomena. There's the damage repair we talked about earlier, and that involves edema. So this is part of the swelling that goes on after damaging exercise. You get swollen. But it doesn't just pertain to strength individuals. Ask anyone who's run a marathon. It's the same phenomena. You get this edema and cell swelling. And it can persist for days, depending on how severe that is. And then the second is when you are using muscle, especially with a lot of volume, you do a legs workout, it's an hour on your legs, you've burnt through substantial amounts of carbohydrate. That could be up to 1 gram a minute like huge amounts of carbohydrate you're burning through. And therefore, you get that post-exercise glycogen supercompensation. And most people think of that in the context of a marathon runner, of depleting and then having pasta parties and then they go up 3 kilos because they've had all the water being pulled in with the carbohydrate. And the same thing happens when you perform split programs. You deplete that area, and then when you eat again, you'll be sucking back in water as well as the carbohydrate, typically 3-ish grams per gram of carbohydrate that you're storing. And because of that, you can get watery or cell swelling.
And that's why sometimes when you take 2 days off, your body just kind of leans out because all of that water is.
Yeah. Typically 72 hours, we see most of it gone.
I think one more important thing to hit in that strength versus hypertrophy, if you're not wanting to put on size necessarily, but then all you ever do is train 8 to 12 reps to failure, you're putting yourself directly in that space. Like, I find that so ironic. I think that's where most women, when they're lifting weights, is where they live. And lots of women now want to put on size, and that's wonderful. I'm so here for it. Like, please build muscle. But I think it's important to understand the difference between those. You can build strength without.
Probably also worth just throwing into the conversation there this sort of toning rep range, this association
let's
with
debunk
higher reps having a toning effect on the muscle.
Firstly, there is no such thing as toning. We have to be specific about
Is there long lean muscles?
Yeah.
Can you get, I was a ballet dancer. Can you get long lean muscles from doing bar class?
Only if you do Pilates. No, I'm just kidding. If it comes down to adaptations, what are you getting from a bar class versus Pilates versus a weight training session? What happens at 15 reps versus 10 reps versus 5 reps? Any explanation you give has to come down to physiological adaptations. That's all it means. What is muscle tone? Well, physiologically, that's the resting tension placed on a muscle. That's of irrelevance to anyone because nobody's using that term in that way. It just typically means we don't want a lot of muscle, but we don't want no muscle, and we don't want a lot of subcutaneous fat, and we want great genetics to have really long limbs. And that's what muscle tone is.
Yeah, I think that's what the reluctance to let go of that word of toning is, because it
encapsulates
multiple goals in one word. You know, so it gives people
multiple goals that are impossible.
It gives them the language to say that I want to build muscle, but not too much muscle, and I want to lose fat, and I want to kind of feel strong when I'm using those muscles, but without being too big. And, you know, it's a word that brings it all together.
It does. It's really an umbrella term. But you ask any 18-year-old female, what do they mean when they come to their trainer and say, I want to look toned? They'll usually give a picture. That picture might be of a runway model or a singer. And you'd look at that and you say, okay, I know what you mean, but look at that limb length. You don't have those bone geometry. That is not you. Your insertions of your muscles don't have that same tendon length. On and on and on. You could explain what tone. I understand what you mean by tone, but this is not a trainable physiological outcome.
There's no rep range that achieves that.
No.
What's interesting is, because I was 100% that girl, because I was a ballet dancer for so long, I just had such a perception of what a beautiful body was. And it was not my genetic gifting. But when I started, I was so afraid to lift heavy. But when I started truly strength training, that's when I got probably the closest to what I had imagined.
Right.
Because I wasn't just doing so much volume and high intensity work, which was what I was trying to do to get lean. And I had that like leaner look across my body without probably the edema, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah.
I think for most of those women, if you were to gun to head, what advice are you going to give? Assuming there's been a run-in period and you've taken care of the general preparation, you've prepared the tendons, ligaments, bones, muscles to withstand regular training.
Yep.
Now we're in a normal training program, all things being equal. I would look at doing 2 days per week, 1 to 2 sets, but probably only 1 or 2 exercises per muscle group, because you don't want a maximalist approach. You want a minimal approach. You want to target the muscle, stimulate it, but with the least amount of volume.
Yeah.
something you said earlier about diminishing returns. I was hoping we'd have a chance to touch back on that. Could you help people understand more about how hitting that third, fourth, fifth, sixth set might not be necessarily doing what they think it's doing, which I'm assuming is kind of pursuing failure?
My clients would be so thrilled if I came in and was like, we only have to do 1 or 2 sets of this. They would be like, yes. So tell us, for their sake.
This week, I had a conversation with a client who I've trained for 20 years. And I asked why he wasn't doing his third session by himself. Because we do total body Tuesday, Thursday, and then he does his own on the weekend. And he said, it's a time issue. I often don't have time. And I went through the whole diminishing returns. And the next session he came back and he said, really good to know. I had explained this. Really good to know that I could get in there and out in 12 minutes. So, right. Because we think the idea of doing more, you get significantly more. And the answer is you do get more, but it's so small. Would you be able to detect it? In other words, if I gave us all 1 or 2 sets versus 4 or 5 sets, could you tell the difference in a year? And the answer is no. It's so small. A physique competitor could. If you're standing in your underwear on stage and you know what to look for, they could tell, but we could not.
It's psychologically so difficult, though, to let go of this idea that doing more doesn't always mean more.
Significantly more.
Significantly more.
Significantly more. Where you can detect the difference.
Yeah.
Because you will. Hypertrophy has tension, but also volume. You do want to experience multiple tension events. But it leads us down a few different roads. Are you better splitting that tension and more sets across different biomechanically different movement patterns?
Yeah.
For your biceps, for example, it's probably not the biggest deal whether you do them in front or arms behind. But for the pecs, which are shoulder flexors, the lower portion is a shoulder extensor, all 3 bring the arm across the body. It would make sense that you do 1 or 2 sets of 3 different actions. The question is, do you do that then in one session with lots of sets, or do you experience that first set several times a week? I'm of the opinion that even though studies are not overwhelmingly positive of frequency, I think that's an artifact of having studies that go 12 weeks.
Yeah. It's something I'm living at the moment because my daughter's only 4 months old. I get about half an hour to train if I'm lucky to get it. And that method of fewer sets, more patterns or more muscle groups, more frequency within the week has been a lifesaver for me.
You've still kept your guns.
As much as I can, yeah. But they don't require as many exercise selections.
It's the thought process. And I think we should start from there. What are we trying to do when we go to the gym? Well, we're placing maximum tension on the muscle. Why? Because then that triggers muscle protein synthesis that after the first session, which is damage repair, is going to go towards muscle hypertrophy. How long does that period last? 48 hours? For a beginner, it's 24 hours.
Yeah.
If you've been lifting for years, your MPS is back down to normal very quickly. Let's call it 48 hours every second day. Therefore, as you've come out of that stimulus period, you want to stimulate it again. And it makes the most sense that then on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you would then get your first set again. Because a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth set gives you less and less and less. Rather than performing 4 sets of 2 exercises, 3 exercises, you'd split that across the week and you get first sets every time. Again, let me be clear, the frequency data, I've just finished a meta-analysis on this. It's not overwhelmingly in favor of frequency, but there's probably explanations for this. And when you look at the underlying physiology of what's going on, you're only in the stimulus period for 48 hours, less. It would make sense then that you would trigger that again and again and again. And that the only way to do that is with a total body. So where's the support for this? Well, the support is before anabolics came in the 1950s, everyone trained total body.
And a physiological response or pharmacological response is going to make things different.
It stops muscle protein breakdown.
Yeah.
Which means that you can train legs and then chest and then back. because your body is pharmacologically driven to growth because it's preventing the breakdown.
Can muscle grow from a pharmacological stimulus without mechanical tension?
Yes. And mechanical tension is the primary driver of muscle growth in humans without pharmacology. Anabolics, steroids.
Yeah.
And about 90, let's call it 95% of the growth we experience is mechanical tension related. There can be stretch mechanisms that trigger muscle growth longitudinally. So when we're growing muscle, you have your biceps, and inside that are muscle fibers. Inside that are myofibrils. Myofibrils are where the machinery happens. And when you perform resistance training, put tension on it, you create more myofibrils. The myofibrils don't get bigger. You get more of them, so you get more marbles on the plate.
Mm.
When you do stretch work, you're creating a different type of triggering of muscle growth, and you lay down sarcomeres in length rather than pushing out. But it's probably 5%. It's so small. So the stretch mechanisms do create hypertrophy, but it's very, very small. Most of it is coming from tension.
Mm.
And that tension is pushing that muscle to grow larger, and you get more myofibrils. That is what we're after. In pharmacology, you're preventing the muscle from ever breaking down. And in Shalanda Bashin's work, is the godfather of testosterone, has shown that in men, he neutered them, so took away their testosterone, and then slowly increased testosterone until it hit what they were producing naturally, and then kept going all the way up. And at those high doses showed that you can build muscle independent of ever lifting weights, because the pharmacology is driving muscle protein synthesis and stopping its breakdown.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Okay, if we recap what we've hit on with regards to hypertrophy and programming up until this point, I think our first talking point was exercise selection and how important it is to train the muscles through all of the available actions of the different directions of the muscle fibers. We've spoken about training proximity towards failure. And I do want to talk about this idea of, are there such thing as stimulating reps or effective reps? Because I almost said it then. But what you were talking about before, about how the weight itself is going to determine how much of the recruitment occurs, how early on in the set. Does that mean that there isn't really this concept of stimulating reps?
It means effective or stimulating for what? And if the answer is, well, to grow muscle, of course, you have to look at the remit meta-regression we talked about. As you approach failure, you get more hypertrophy. And yes, the closer you get to hypertrophy, the closer you get to failure, the greater the trigger for hypertrophy. But it's so similar when you're at failure versus 1 rep in reserve versus 2. The idea is that you see most of your benefit 5 reps from failure. And that's where the idea of effective reps come in. That is, if you're doing 10 reps to failure, it's the last 5 that created the trigger. And that's been pushed in a number of directions, such as, well, why bother doing 10 reps? Why don't you just do 5? Because that's your effective reps. And the answer from multiple avenues will either be, so you're going to do 5 reps for the rest of your life? That's point 1.
Yeah.
Point 2, it's really a facile or a simplistic way of looking at things. You could do 25 reps. Sure, it's the last 5 that created enough tension, but you're still working through different metabolic pathways and cycling through different muscle fibers that for some people, they might want to do 25 reps because of their joints or for metabolic benefits. I think it's just a really simplistic way of trying to take physiology, take the reps in reserve literature and say, here's a rule. We're going to follow this rule forever.
Yeah.
I think most people saying this actually don't coach people.
You can't separate the muscle from the person.
Right.
Yeah, the preferences are so important. How would you simplify the recommendation for sets and rep ranges for hypertrophy?
Who is the person? What is their goal? How many times a week do they get to train? What is their recovery like? And what else are they trying to accomplish within the week? And that's how you make a program bespoke. Most people want a little bit of everything, as we started the entire conversation. And this all goes into the thought process of, what does that day look like? Let's assume it's an hour. Well, in that hour, how are we going to allot the muscle groups? Are you going to do a split, or are you going to do a total body? As I've mentioned, I'm of the belief that most people, most of the time, should train total body 2 or 3 times a week. If you're training 2 times a week, you've got no option. You have to train total body.
Yeah.
If you're training 3 times a week, you might get away with different structures. 4 times a week, you could do upper, lower. But most people, most of the time, should do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, total body. The next question is, we've got an hour. Where do you want to spend that time? What do you want to prioritize? What's already good? What's not good? Where do you want to bring up visually? Do we have weak links we need to throw? This is where the coach comes in and fills this in. And once you lay out the list of the coverage of everything you want to do, then you need to ask the question, can we actually do that in an hour? And if the answer is yes, great. For minimum time, you pick one exercise, one good exercise for the shoulders, the pecs, the lats, your glutes, your quads, your hamstrings, your abs. Okay, we're at 7. You could do calves and arms, call it 10. You could do 1 or 2 sets easily in 30 minutes.
How would you define a good exercise?
One that uses a multiple function, where a muscle does multiple things. For example, if you do a bench press, dumbbell press, you're using the lower, the middle, and the upper portions of the pecs to create that arm abduction. If you're doing a pull down, like a wide pronated grip, you're using most of your lats to do that function. Yeah, your lats are also extensors. Your upper pecs are flexors. So we're thinking the big movement to cover a lot of the functions of that muscle.
The big rocks.
Right. And in that case, you do 1 or 2 sets. Again, I like a warm-up set. This has become controversial lately. But working with people in the public, they need to get their brain from their kids drop off to school or the work meeting and get their brain in the exercise. We always do a warm-up set. And then we do the work set. And if that work set was more than 2 reps in reserve, they'll do a second set. But that's how you come up with the program design. And if you've got 10 exercises, you'll just repeat that across the week. If, in some cases, you end up with 20 exercises because you've got 6 for the glutes, for example, and 2 for the quads, and 3 for the pecs, you can't do that all in one workout.
Yeah.
So we split that into what's called an A and a B. And it will be still total body, but this one will have the squats and the leg extension, the hip thrust and the Romanians, and this one might have the one leg press, the step up, and different glute exercise, the abduction ones, for example. And you've still got total body, but from different biomechanical aspects. And you just roll them over. So you're getting done 1.5 times a week.
Would you ever actually prescribe someone to do the exact same workout every Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Absolutely.
What are there any downsides to that?
None. Only coverage.
Yeah, not hitting.
Assuming that a client doesn't get bored.
Yeah.
But this is now where coaching comes in. And this is the tension of, well, how quickly should we change a program? Most clients want a program every 4 weeks. Damage repair takes the first 2 weeks of that.
Yeah.
Because new exercise, you get a bit sore. Doesn't matter how long you've been lifting. If it's a new exercise and you haven't done it for 6 months, you got damage repair. So you're not driving hypertrophy those first 2 weeks. And then those next 2 weeks is still motor control. You're not really creating hypertrophy yet. Hypertrophy takes 8-10 weeks. So one of the major errors that we have as coaches, or the tension that we have, is the client's expectation for constant change versus what we know is takes a lot longer to get through the damage repair, to get through the motor learning of the new skill. Even if you've been doing it for, it's still motor learning. How do we know this? You do squats for 6 months and then you take them out for a few months. You do other stuff, leg press, leg extension. You come back to the squat. You weren't where you were in that last program. You got motor control to get back there again. So what's your feedback loop to tell you, are you making improvement in what you're interested in, which is muscle mass? Well, ultimately is that your numbers go up, but after the first few sessions, because it's damage repair and then there's motor learning, they're just going to keep going up. It's got nothing to do with muscle mass.
So how long should someone be on a program for, a hypertrophy program?
2 very simple answers. As long as your motivation is there. And that could be, my son, for example, did the same program for a year, Didn't know any difference. Loved it.
Wow.
Same thing.
So should we be periodizing our workouts?
Let me answer that after I answer the second part. Because
Okay.
if a client's
sorry.
expectation is to move really quickly, then move it quickly. But you change the exercise so it's the same exercise, but it's slightly different. It's a bench press to a dumbbell press. Same.
Even just changing the exercise order, or I've even had clients just go do the same workout in a different gym. And that was enough. To,
different gym,
sort of
overload technique added to it, exercise order. These are all things, but you try and keep the exercise really similar, because if you change the exercise, because the client goes, oh, we're doing squats again. Yeah, you're doing squats again, because if I change it to a step up, they're different fibers. And the fibers that we used in a squat will atrophy after a week. Muscle fibers don't hang around. What you just developed, you will lose again. Another colleague in Sweden who with MRI showed that once you stop the training, those fibers that you've just developed, they're gone and they start detraining in a week.
Yeah,
Wow.
you rent muscle mass, you don't buy it.
Yes, right. Yeah. So you constantly, now luckily, most exercises will reach common ground.
Right.
But that's why there's exercise variety, because if they're biomechanically different, they will be using different fibers. So if you don't continue with that type of exercise, it will not continue. It will not grow. To answer your question, should you then periodize? Depends what you mean by periodization, and everyone has their own definition of what that means. The most accepted definition, it's the long-term approach to programming that involves sequences and timelines to train different qualities that typically benefit from each other. And originally, this was for sports performance that needed a strength component. It's then been taken into the world of bodybuilding. And this answers a point before where you can often conflate strength and hypertrophy. This is where they don't mean the same thing. When you look at the data on hypertrophy and periodization, the data is really weak when you look at the review. So how do we know the answer? Let's look at a review. And we might look at a recent 2022 paper by Moscard that concludes that for hypertrophy, there is no benefit of periodization. Okay, we could either accept that at face value, or we can go and look at all the studies that reported hypertrophy. Firstly, not one study was designed to optimize hypertrophy. It was done for strength. And because strength has a component of muscle, they measure one area, one snippet of muscle. But how do we know if the muscle grew there or there or there? Or it's a total body workout, but lower body dominant. They're measuring strength of a squat or a counter movement for power. But let's measure cross-sectional surface area in the biceps. So these studies don't have the primary outcome of being designed for and the test to measure hypertrophy. That tells us that you can't confidently make that statement, that periodization is not helpful for hypertrophy. Point one. Point two, well, let's use physiology. How would periodization ever help hypertrophy? It's got to be doing something. And we've only got one study, that actually measured what's called phase potentiation. Because periodization works on the principle that what you do here will benefit you here. And this study looked at 12 weeks of constant rep range, and I think it was 10 to 12, versus starting with a strength block and then doing that training. And it showed that the phase potentiation, in other words, getting stronger before you did the volume, helped you do the volume. You could lift more load, and it created a detectable hypertrophy benefit. That's called phase potentiation, but it's only one study. Don't hang your hat on one study. But there is an interesting proof of principle that if you design your programs to phase potentiate, this will help that, then that's how you design periodization. But there needs to be a mechanism. That is, how does periodization work? Full stop. The design of it needs to be done in such a way that it's augmenting what you do here, and then that will augment what you do there.
How does the concept of progressive overload align with this conversation around periodization for hypertrophy?
You could say that progressive overload is almost everything. That is, the muscle needs constant challenge or working close to failure. And that's almost a full stop. Periodization would then say you could get superior outcomes if you organize that progressive overload to change these timelines. And that is, we could design a program to increase maximal strength and motor unit recruitment. And then we're going to take those developments, let's call it a hip thrust. You did 6 weeks, 8 weeks of working in the 3 to 5 rep range, and you got significantly stronger. Then when you did your next block of hip thrusts, has to be the same exercise, then you will be able to lift more load, access more motor units, and then hypertrophy those. That's phase potentiation. That makes physiological sense. How does that compare to just always doing 6 to 8 reps of hip thrusts for the same period? And the answer is it's probably going to be pretty similar. Do I use periodization? Absolutely, because it gives the clients buy-in to what they're doing. But again, if you were gun to head and said, well, prove to me physiologically it's better, I can't do that. And a lot of the physiological literature in periodization, it's not amazing because they actually didn't measure physiology. They didn't measure motor unit firing. They just measured strength outcomes and inferred, well, if they got stronger, then the nervous system had to improve.
Can we clarify one thing?
Yeah.
This idea of like 1 to 2 sets, is that is specific to hypertrophy, or does that also apply to building strength?
It applies to strength too. It applies to strength more than it does to hypertrophy.
Interesting. So someone would still need to build up, they'd need a couple of warm-up sets if they were going to do close to those max numbers, but 1 set is enough to stimulate strength.
Correct.
Adaptation.
And we use the data from the Pelland group. And they've done a wonderful lot of work readdressing how many sets do you need, how close to failure do you need to get, how often in a week you need to do it. So a really good group of studies. And surprisingly, it's the opposite of what you think. You don't need to work right to failure for strength, and you probably only need 2 sets. And this is the balance of nervous system fatigue, local fatigue, form breakdown, and the stimulus recovery period so you can do it again and get motor learning again and again. But as anyone knows, if you are really working up to a 200 kilo hip thrust or a 200 kilo squat, you might take 6 sets to get there. 20 kilos, 40 kilos, 80 kilos, but they're not your work sets.
Right.
It's when you get in proximity to failure, that is set 1 and 2.
Tony, can we recap on all the elements that we've touched upon about what matters most to designing a program for hypertrophy?
I think the way you framed that is perfect. It's what matters most. We'll often focus on the lesser details, and it's not that they don't matter. They need to go into a program somewhere, but we don't fuss about them so much. The most important is that clients can safely achieve maximum tension on the muscle. How do we do that? We pick an exercise for a given muscle, and after a familiarization set or a warm-up set, we work at 2 or very close to failure. Typically 2 reps in reserve, I think, is a good rule of thumb. How do you know? One day, just ask a client to do as many reps as possible. So if you've been giving them 10 reps, say do as many and then they can do 15, they had 5 reps in reserve and you can up the weight. Tension, number 1. Then we've got set number. There's a diminishing return for subsequent sets. That doesn't mean no return. That just means diminishing. In other words, we get most of our benefit from the first 2 sets. And given no one exercise can hit every available muscle fiber, and hypertrophy is a fiber-specific phenomena, not a muscle group phenomena, it's fiber-specific, it would make sense that you did 1 or 2 exercises across a number of different biomechanically different movement patterns for the same muscle. Some muscles need more of that. Glutes and chest, as we've said, they have multiple functions, need multiple exercises. So we've got tension. We achieve that through working very close to failure with low set number so we can achieve higher exercise variety. The next question is logical. Well, how do you distribute that across a week? I'm of the belief that we would do that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 times a week. In other words, we get 3 stimulus periods because the stimulus period is really done and dusted by 48 hours. And rather than waiting again a number of days, it would make sense that we did Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And if you like minimum dose, you would do 1 set, 8 to 10 exercises, a good exercise for all major muscle groups. If you want more, then do more. You can do more sets, you can do more exercises, but you'll often then need to split that workout, because as soon as you pass 10-ish exercises, call it 12, you will need to split that across 2 sessions. And I would rather have an A and B total body workout where you do the same muscle but from different angles, and you just roll those over. And then the final question is, well, how long would you stay on that program? And the answer is so simple: as long as your client will let you. Because you got to get through the damage repair, you got to get through the motor learning, and hypertrophy is the last thing to kick in, and it is very slow. And the quicker you're changing programs, you never know if you're making progress. You never really spend time truly hypertrophying those fibers. So the only way around it for clients who get to week 3 and think it's a time for a new program, and we're changing next week, you give them the same muscle group, same exercise, but slightly different exercise, or add an overload technique. Frankly, I usually do both. I will change the exercise subtly, and a plate-loaded leg press becomes a pin-loaded leg press, and a plate-loaded hip thrust becomes a Smith machine hip thrust. And it's the same thing. They think it's new. Their muscles think it's the same thing. And that's it. That's the order. Now, we're about rest between sets and the tempo and where do overload techniques fit in. And they're the details, but they're so low down.
And when it comes to this conversation about periodization, is there a place for deloads?
Deloads come from the world of endurance training and strength training, typically for sports, where the entire training week would accumulate considerable fatigue such that you see a reduction in performance. That then tells you you've now reached that point that you are overreaching. If you kept going, you would overtrain. We need to dial things back, reduce the frequency, the volume, typically not the intensity, just do less, and the body will supercompensate. The issue is that this is all language and phenomena of sports, not physiology, and certainly not muscle mass. I would argue that if you saw deterioration in your performance, i.e. you're accumulating fatigue, and that's what fatigue means, that program was not designed well. You should not be seeing, other than day-to-day fluctuations, which we all experience, bad sleep, stress, brain just not in there. If you see a reduction in your performance, that is the textbook definition of fatigue. That means that everything you've put into that program will need an audit.
Does that mean that potentially the rest wasn't accounted for well in the structure of the weekly format?
Yeah. It typically means most people are doing too much for their ability to recuperate. See point A, you really only need 1 or 2 sets of multiple different exercises. And if that session lasts an hour, you've got 48 hours to recover. Where do we see running into problems? Well, doing sessions that take too long, 2-hour sessions, 3-hour sessions, training weights every day, or not getting the balance of hard and easy. Weight training Monday, intervals Tuesday, weight training Wednesday, interval. You see? And then you see a reduction in performance by week 3. That means you are not absorbing the training volume, and something needs to change.
Outside of like your actual performance, what are some other signals that you might get from your body that you're not recovering well and something needs to shift?
That's it. Because fatigue is demonstrated by your ability to perform above baseline.
Right.
That's it. You could feel tired, but you could still perform unbelievably. So there's mental fatigue, but that is not exercise fatigue.
Right.
And of course, we consider all of these things when we're delivering a program, but mental fatigue usually doesn't lead to a deterioration in performance. You could be tired, have the best workouts. That is almost universal across my clients who come and say, I didn't sleep well. It's been a huge week at work. I am tired. You get them warmed up. They perform better than they ever had because they don't have any expectations on themselves.
So does chronic stress have an impact on
Absolutely.
fat loss or performance?
Tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
So chronic stress is a potent glucocortico. That is, when you elevate cortisol, it has an evolutionary physiological effect. It will raise up your glucose levels. It will get you ready for a fight and flight response. But in doing so, it is creating that new glucose from breaking down muscle fibers. And this is why chronic stress is a big part of the muscle loss that you see in the literature of either people who are stressed or those people under stressful situations like caloric deprivation. You look at any study where people are losing vast amounts of weight, there will be a loss of fat mass, but there's also a loss of muscle mass. Why? Because they are stressed being in that position. They're either mentally stressed, they don't like those feelings, and then they're under physiological stress, which that marked energy deficit is. So there's multiple types of stress. If you're doing something you don't like to do and it's unpleasant, that's stressful by definition.
Very true.
That's why we design programs to get the best from our client without triggering, oh, that sucked.
Is it important to utilize physical activity to regulate the stress response?
Studies have looked at this, and it is profound. The more challenging the exercise, and often they do this with interval training, but there's also resistance training studies as well. When you're put back into stress situations and they give you stress tests to do, you perform better on these physiological resilient stress tests after performing challenging activities like interval training, weight training. It actually improves cortisol regulation. So you will hear on the internet every day, you can't open your app without seeing high intensity exercise causes cortisol. And females should not do this because it increases cortisol. But when you swipe, it's, oh, this interval training causes the cortisol. Zone 2 causes the cortisol. Weight training causes the cortisol. Well, is it every exercise? Well, yeah, actually exercise does increase cortisol because it's stress. For that hour, it's stress. Yeah. And the body mounts a stress response that makes you more resilient afterwards.
So it's the dose.
It's the dose.
Okay.
You got it. And of course, there can be ways you don't want to exacerbate it if you haven't slept and you're under-fueled and underfed. And then you have a very challenging exercise session in the morning because that's the only time you can do it, then we tend to feed carbohydrates in that session to blunt the cortisol response. So we typically use orange juice intra-training. They carry that around with them. And that helps blunt that glucocortico response.
Wow. Yeah, so it's the dose balanced with the recovery protocols.
Absolutely.
I've got to get on that OJ.
Yeah, seriously. Never knew. Do women need more recovery than men?
No, but no two males and females need the same amount of recovery. It's not a sex-specific question.
Yeah.
How does a person gauge how much recovery they individually require?
Your ability to perform a known task at that time.
Right.
In other words, if you're doing an AAA, same workout, and you turn up on Wednesday, assuming the first week you've got through the muscle damage repair and the repeated bout effect is kicked in. If you lift less weights, you did too much and too close to failure on Monday. It's a real-time feedback loop. And for most people, it's too many sets.
With over 30 years of history in the industry, are there any things that you feel like we're getting wrong right now that we really need to be like on high alert for when we're scrolling our feed and it's feeding us very extreme things?
On the positive, exercise works. Weight training works. And the internet debates the best method. But if you're lifting weights, even if you got it all wrong, it still works. And
True.
It's very forgiving. I'm just in the game of optimizing these things. And that's often mistaken for the only way. Well, there's many different ways. I've got very good friends, very good coaches, do things very different to me.
Yeah.
But it still works. Because it's weight training, exercise works. So where can it go wrong? You do too much, can't recover from it. How do you know? Reduction in exercise performance. You do too little, but then you'll say, why isn't it working? Because it's not enough dose. And I think everything else probably falls under those categories of doing too much or too little. Where do we see the internet going wrong is maybe trying to complicate it.
Yeah.
We see in every field, for endurance, for strength, for females, for around your cycle or around menopause, you name it.
Yeah.
If there are really specific guidelines for you based on sex, that's going to be false, because despite knowing that there's marked physiological differences that beyond dispute, doesn't matter what system you look at, there are sex differences.
Yeah.
The question is, how does that impact your ability to respond to a program? i.e., you need a different approach. Yeah. And coaches and scientists aren't dumb. They didn't just wake up today and think, oh, we missed all of this since we've been studying women. I mean, Jack Wilmore has been studying resistance training in women since 1973. Nobody just turned around a few years ago and said, guys, you missed all of this. You got it all wrong. You've just been doing men's stuff. Right. Women have different physiology, different bone density, different fatigue resistance, fiber types, on and on and on. Okay, great. So if you guys followed the same program, you would expect to see differences because there's no. Males and females respond the same. Of course, there's individual differences. We would expect that. We see that in male-only cohorts and female-only cohorts. There's huge differences. But you pull them together, they respond to the same trajectory. So where should there be differences? Well, when you require it based on your needs analysis, but not sex.
Yeah, so when people are looking at the information on the internet, they're not asking the question, is this right for me as a female? Or is this right for me as a male? It's, is this right for me? Full stop. Does this fit with my goal, my injury background,
how often I get to train, how much I like training? So, believe it or not, some people actually don't like exercising, right? So we give them the minimum dose. What's the minimum? Okay, we can get you in and out of the weights in 15 minutes. One exercise, one set on machines. Don't even need warm-ups. Just in and out.
Is there anything you've heard recently specific to women that stands out that you're like, that just isn't true? Like we've kind of targeted that misinformation.
The idea that women need to lift heavy and do more high intensity exercise because they've got more slow twitch fibers. Well, firstly, the physiology is dubious. There's mixed findings. It's not clear cut. And secondly, since when do you prescribe exercise on fiber typing? It doesn't make any sense. I've got coaches who just coach Olympians, and they coach males and females. Yeah. If you ask them, for that female swimmer there, you doing it based on their physiology because they're a female? It's like, no. We're doing it on what they need to perform. So we use the tried and true methods of improving VO2 max, rate of force development. But you do it based on the needs, the goals. Everyone needs to develop more fast twitch fibers because we lose them as we age, male and female.
Yeah.
The same principles apply. Why am I passionate about it? It's very simple. Both males and females need good information and not to get confused or overwhelmed with so many rules because they're a female going through menopause or they're a female and they're trying to track their cycle. It can be really overwhelming and you could lose the important points of, well, you need consistency, you need to love what you do, and you need to get in there and do it with high degree of effort.
So the distinction between training as a male or training as a female, maybe not as different as it's popularized. What about training for different ages?
Again, very similar based on needs, based on history. There's essentially 3 types of people as you age. There's lifelong people who never stopped. You won't need to change anything because they're so adapted to exercise. There are those people who then stopped, trained and then stopped families, jobs, and then took it back up again. You would need to be more aware of tendon injuries, doing too much too soon. And then there's those who've never exercised and then took it up.
I've got about 3 guys in their 40s at the moment who I've been talking to who have all recently just started back playing football.
Right.
And they had played at a higher level, maybe 15 to 20 years earlier, and Achilles, quad tendons, all those things that are flaring
We
up.
know what's going to happen, and therefore we design the program to start with a more gentle run-in. Whereas for us who've never stopped, then you don't need to do run-ins.
Right.
You just train. Whereas for those folks, where do we get injured? Adductor, hamstring, Achilles tendon. We know what happens. You could invest in a company that puts by the table physio tables next to the soccer game for these guys who come back after 20 years because you know what's going to happen.
So
right?
true.
Yeah, it's an idea for
a business
our
idea.
CEO. Yeah.
Well, I would love to have you back on sometime soon to talk all things longevity in this space, because that's really it at the end of the day, right? The goal of exercise is so that we can keep moving and doing these things, the sports that we love. And if you love the gym, going to the gym for as long as we possibly can, that infinite game mentality. So you have a lot more knowledge on that. We do not have time for it today, but hopefully we can have that conversation in the future.
Love to.
We have one final question that we ask every guest, which is, how are you currently raising the bar in your life?
I'm raising the bar by keeping busy doing the things that I love doing.
Ooh, love that.
And I know that keeping really physically fit, you can't stop. So I haven't taken a day off training since I hurt my back. Other than that, I haven't taken a day off in a decade or so.
Wow.
and some of most of it is very low intensity, but it's a habit. Like I sleep and I clean my teeth, I will exercise. And then I just fill my life with those things that bring me passion and excitement.
What are some of the things that have fallen by the wayside in order for you to keep doing the things that you're passionate about?
Toxic friendships primarily. It's those things that you feel you should because you always have, and then you realize they're not interested in me. And if they do, they just talk about themselves. And I just let them go.
And that allows you to dedicate more time, to the things that matter most.
Yeah, family, friends, health. I think what we all strive for is a full life of those things that we love doing.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony. Appreciate you coming in.